My name's Kenny Dyal, and welcome to Season 2 of the Scuba Diving Podcast. This episode's topic is dive buddies. Michael Kest is going to join us. He's our regular in-house guest, and we're going to discuss what makes a good dive buddy, how necessary are dive buddies. I know it's a hot topic. How do you screen for buddies, and how do you become a good dive buddy, and what do you do in a situation where you might run into someone who's not as good of a dive buddy as you thought they were. So we're going to cover all that. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the show. All right, first question. What makes a good dive buddy?
What makes a good dive buddy?
Yeah.
Somewhat simply.
Simply. Are you nervous? You're a jury trial attorney. I'm in your office. I mean, you have the home field advantage here, and you're nervous. Are your hands shaking?
Easy thing to determine whether someone's a good dive buddy is if they're self-sufficient. If you're in a situation where you need help and your buddy isn't self-sufficient, they're not going to be able to help you.
We hear self-sufficient all the time, though, in the books and all this. It sounds like one of those terms. Like, what?
How can you be
where,
self-sufficient in a book? You know what that
I'm not
means?
getting sucked into that at all. That's edited right out. No, in the books, you always hear a self-sufficient diver, and you hear people say that. But But like, okay, realistically, you're on a dive charter boat.
Okay.
They buddy you up with somebody. What are some of the signs you see right off the bat where you go, oh?
Well, I mean, the first thing is if they put their BC on facing the wrong direction. If someone doesn't know that simple thing of the air.
Oh, you mean the tank valve?
Yeah, the tank valve.
Way.
Yeah, what did you think I meant?
You said the BC on backwards. I don't think they're wearing it like a front fanny pack.
No, I mean the air is facing away from the BC.
The opening
fanny pack. No,
I'm like, all right, trying to be funny.
No, I didn't mean that. Yeah, no.
Swinging hard.
That's why I was confused. No, I mean legitimately where the tank is turned around and facing away from the back of the BC. Because, and then they go to put it on. That in itself, it's kind of like when you're seeing if someone is nervous. One simple thing isn't going to be it because their mind just may be somewhere else. But if then they go to put it on and they can't figure out why the regulator isn't going the right way. And this is stuff that I've experienced, like actually seen people do, not off the top of my head. They go to try and put it on and then they turn the air on and they can't understand why that's happening. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad diver. It does mean they're nervous and it does mean they're not experienced. And then you can just start talking to them. And the easiest way is, how long you been diving, how many dives you got, all that. And that will give you a pretty good idea as to where the person is. But you can start seeing those signs immediately. You can also see a lot of times people who, and this isn't an automatic thing because sometimes people dive in different places. Sometimes people do shore dives. Sometimes they do boat dives. Sometimes they do commercial boat dives. But if you see someone who just doesn't really understand what to do with their gear on a boat, which is something that happens, like their gear spread all over the place, or they don't understand that they got a bungee in their tank or things like that. Again, it could be someone who has lots of experience. They just do mostly shore dives or they do off their own private boat. But it also could mean that the person doesn't have much experience. And it goes simply to the fact of how comfortable you are in the water. And the more experience you have, the more comfortable you're going to be in the water. I will almost every day take someone with 100 dives over someone with 10 dives.
Now, what about recency, though? Recency is a big factor.
Recency matters. Recency matters with, number one, how recent, and number two, how many dives you had in the past. Someone like you or me, been diving for years, we could take a year off, go get in the water, and you wouldn't miss a beat because you've just got so much experience. But someone who's got...
It does degrade. And the better your skill set or the better your comfort, the longer it'll last you.
Correct.
And maybe you never quite get to that point to where you're like,
Right, well, and that's what I'm saying.
There's like a baseline, but you're not going to stay sharp if it's been years and years and years.
Right, and that's why I said the amount of time. 1 year, me and you not diving isn't going to make a difference. Well, okay, for you it will. That's true. But
you actually you hijacked my joke.
I did. No question about it.
That's the last one. That's the last freebie you're gonna get.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, someone who got certified 10 years ago and is coming on their first dive in 10 years, even if they had 100 dives 10 years ago, is not going to be very comfortable. Now, they may get it back after the first, second, third dive, but they're not going to be very comfortable doing that. On the other hand, someone who has 15 or 20 dives, but their last dive was 2 weeks ago and the dive before that, 2 or 3 weeks, they're probably going to be pretty comfortable even though they've only got that 20 or 30 dives.
So not to cut you off, but I'm going to need a chart to follow this, and I think we got the idea. Where in the dive, in the water, do you find yourself going, okay, where at what point or what action is it starting to ruin your dive?
Part of it depends on what kind of dive you're doing. If you're in a stable dive, like you're on a wreck and there's a mooring buoy and everything, and they get down to the deck, for the most part, it's probably going to be okay as long as they've got, there's not an air issue. If they've got enough that they got a decent amount of time under there, you're probably okay until they're just sitting there fiddling with everything. They can't stay, and usually that's the first thing is if their buoyancy is so bad that they can't seem to keep from bouncing up and down off the bottom. Number one, they're going to be out of air fast because there's just no getting around that. I mean, when they're putting and draining air in there. The other thing you can see is when they try and drain air in the inflator hose and they're like holding it like this, trying to get air out of it, and they can't, and they're going up and then they're turning upside down and they can't understand how to get it out.
They're not aware of where that air is rising and moving around in their BC.
Right. Which is something that you should learn in your open water class.
We know that one doesn't stick very well.
Right, it doesn't stick very well. That's an easy skill to remind them, and you can show them underwater, and usually they'll go, oh, okay, I got it, and they'll be okay. If you've got an inexperienced diver, keep your eyes on them the first couple minutes of the dive, help them with a few of those things, and then they get comfortable. If they're not getting comfortable, they're doing the same things over and over again, it's just not going to be a fun dive. You're going to end up having to watch them, and you're going to end up having to, I hate to say it, but babysit them.
That's where the dive buddy's inexperience ruins it for you. For me,
exactly.
Big thing that I find, whether it's taxing or not, to bring somebody along, it's weights. The big demarcation line, besides having good buoyancy and basic diving skills, for me it's weights. The people that just never seem to have a clue how much weight they need, or I see a lot of people that they come in there definitively, I take 8 pounds of weight. They don't know what tank we're using yet. They don't know the BC. They don't know if we're wearing a wetsuit, how thick the wetsuit is, how old the wetsuit is. And I've seen big, poofy, fluffy BCs that take an extra 2 or 3 pounds to sink, just the BC.
Right.
Or, the difference between a 3 mil and a 5 mil suit is a few pounds, especially if it's a bigger person.
Or you have the guys from up north that usually dive a 7 mil. They're now diving a shorty, and they're like, I need about 26 pounds. And you're like, you don't need 26 pounds.
Yeah, that's an anvil.
Yes, you will not be able to get off the bottom.
Or they haven't been diving in a year and maybe they put on 10 or 15 pounds. I've over Christmas break, where I went on Christmas break and went on a cruise. Don't even go there. And you're just waiting to pounce.
Just waiting for it.
And I needed like an extra pound. It was like I'm like, oh, I'm going to throw another little pellet in here.
A 6-pound pellet.
Yeah, a 2-pound pellet. But yeah, if you go to a steel tank, I mean, that can swing it, if it's big enough, like 6 pounds.
Right.
Or more. And so for me, it's the questions, how much weight do you think I need?
Yeah.
I think might be the one where a big red flag goes up and says you're not ready yet. Now, we'll try and correct it once, and I'm always nice, but if this is a recurring issue, that seems to be the mark to me. If they are comfortable with their weight, or they ask questions like, well, how thick of a suit do you wear here? Maybe they haven't been there before, they don't know how cold it is or whatever, and they say, well, I'm wearing a 5 mil. Then they go, okay, do you have any extra weight for me? I'm gonna have to up it. Okay, there, now we're talking, I'm excited. You're asking the right questions.
Right.
Exactly. The babysit factor to me just dropped a little bit, and now I'm excited about the dive.
Yeah. It also means it's someone who's interested in more than just, okay, I learned how to dive, now I'm going to dive. And it's like, no, it's a constant learning process. If you think you know everything, like someone who gets on there, as you said, like I use 8 pounds, or I only dive this kind of thing. When they come in knowing everything as an open water diver, the other thing is if they say, I'm a PADI diver, you go, no, you're a scuba diver. You got certified through PADI.
That means they haven't been out much to know that there are multiple agencies,
right?
And there are different agencies.
And I'm not just crapping on PADI, but it's
SSI level 2. I'm a NAUI diver.
And it's like nobody cares. Are you a diver or not? Like nobody cares who you got certified through.
And what most people don't know, and I only learned this in more recent years.
And just to be fair, I have PADI, NAUI, YMCA. Yeah, I mean, like most people who've been diving for years have multiple.
And just to be fair, no one cares.
Yeah, I know. That's my point. Thank you for proving my point.
Yeah, and see how we don't care about your certifications right now?
Exactly.
Especially me.
Right. I just meant to say I wasn't crapping on anybody specifically, but
yeah. So once you get out there, you realize the different certifications are just different flavors of the same certification, which I only in recent years found out was an international standard, an ISO standard, and there's actually a number there. It's ISO autonomous diver is really what open water. Did you even know that? Be honest. No, I didn't. You didn't? All right. So
you got me.
Yeah, it's the Worldwide Recreational Scuba Training Council.
Of course, you could just be totally making this up right now as well.
You know what? Had I thought about it, I would not have missed the opportunity. I'm going to bake something into the next one, just like that. I'm sure you will. It's a Worldwide Recreational Scuba Training Council, and people sit on that advisory panel or board or whatever it is from the different agencies. But this way, they're all speaking the same language. If you're Patty here and you go do a NAUI dive there, the standards are all, the minimums are all going to meet a certain standard. Yeah. Okay, speaking of dive buddies, dive buddy is the topic for a day in case you didn't. Someone just came up to me and said, you know what's annoying? Is when divers are all up in my face, they're too close, they're bumping me, they're kicking me. How close is too close, or how far is too far for a dive buddy? You know, where is that line where you're a safe distance? Average diver, average dive.
Someone just came up and said this to you.
Hey, earlier.
Okay. What? There's no way this is when people go online and go, my kid just came up to me.
You have tears in your eyes because you think it's that funny. It's not that funny.
Totally made up story. No. Someone came up and said this
Katie
to me.
Katie said it to me when I was going over these topics.
Adding important stuff to. Okay, got it.
That's a true story.
All right, fair enough. Okay, too close to me.
It's not all a jury trial, Mike.
Yeah. Too close to me is probably 3 feet. You want to be able to be close enough to someone that, you know, especially like on drift dives, so that they're not so far that you're trying to bang, hey, come back here, trying to swim across the current, you know, or swim back against the current to see something. But at the same time, the whole point of being underwater is to get space. You're in this 3D world that you can kind of relax and spread out, and you don't have all the, you know, you're not locked to the ground anymore. You got this space, and that's
right. We call it scuba diving.
I understand it's called scuba.
What's too far to you from a safety perspective?
I mean,
not for you, for a typical diver.
Right, for a typical diver, it's a depends answer. Because if you're in 100 foot of visibility water, 15, 20 feet, 30 feet, even 40 feet, depending on, you know, how good the divers are, is probably fine. As long as you keep an eye, and, you know, even like 60 foot visibility, if you get about 25, 30 feet away, you get looking at something and someone else swims the other way, you can get apart from each other where you can't find each other pretty quickly. It really kind of depends on the visibility. And obviously, if you're in, like, you know, 5 foot of visibility water, then what the hell are you doing in the first place? Why are you diving that? But assuming you are,
times.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I know there's guys up north that are like, listen, it's the only thing we got. We got to go get in the... Yeah, it's a good day if you can see 5 feet. So I don't blame you. I'm not making fun of you. I got mad respect for you. But if you're there, obviously you got to be a lot closer. But yeah, it really depends on the condition.
Tell me if you agree with this. Don't need to be attached to the hip, particularly once they start getting comfortable. If you had a surprise out of air, how much time would you want to get their attention, get to them, and them give you their air source, or alternate air source?
Right.
Octo for some of you. Safe second for some others. I always say, like, you know, as a surprise, blow all the air out, like, and then hold it. Right. Because everyone can sit here comfortably in an air-conditioned room. It's easy to hold your breath and go, okay, I can signal them in here. But under there, you're probably breathing more. You're not going to expect the out-of-air situation. Because I've seen it happen. You've probably seen it happen. Yeah. And the look of, like, oh, my gosh. Yeah.
The eyes that get as big as saucers.
Right, and everyone starts going, and you realize, like, oh, wow, no one's even looking my way. They're swimming the other way. It can happen. Yep. I would give yourself a little leeway from the breath hold in the comfortable room test. Right. Maybe cut that down to about half.
Yeah. No, that's probably a good call.
And then also another thing is, like, with your buddy, since we're talking about buddies, I've found that most people have absolutely no idea how to work other people's gear. Your buddy's gear is your rescue pack. Right. You know, if you're out of air, you're going to breathe off of them. And I've found that if they do a buddy check and they don't learn the other person's, like, octo, or if they maybe have one of the integrated ones or whatever, and they have absolutely no idea how to share air, or if that person was unconscious, how to rescue them, they don't know where the buttons are or anything. Right.
Which is crazy when you think about it, because the whole point is the person who has their own gear doesn't need the octo. They're not. There's very few situations where the primary is going to fail and you have to use your octo. It's almost always your octo is being used to hand off to somebody else. So yeah, not looking at someone else's gear before you go under and understanding how to use it is crazy. Now, if you're someone you dive with all the time, you're probably pretty comfortable with it. But we're talking about the situation where you get on a dive boat, someone you've never met before. Yeah, the first thing is go over their gear and make sure they know yours and say, hey, look, like this is how I've got mine. I either got mine on a necklace or I got it, latched right under here. If you need it, just grab it, whatever.
Do you think people don't do that enough?
They don't do that at all. That's not quite true. Brand new divers, people who are within 3 to 4 dives of certification, usually do it. And people who have 1,000 dives or more under their belt usually do it. But that leaves the vast majority of divers in the middle who don't do it. Yeah, I mean, a couple dives in, they're like, hey, I'm good to go. Yeah, that's my buddy. He'll help me if we need. No. The whole point is his gear is supposed to be yours in an emergency. Like, that's the whole point.
So do you think the most dangerous diver is the mid-level diver?
Yes.
Why do you suppose that is? Well, and I agree with that.
Yeah, a new diver knows usually their limitations. Definitely apprehensive, a little nervous. Not necessarily a fear, but more of a, I gotta be real careful. I know that this is supposed to be fun, and it is, and I'm doing it because I enjoy it, but at the same time, there's a lot that can go wrong, and so their brain's racing with everything they can, and they're trying to make sure that they got everything, and they're probably not gonna take many chances. The divers who have been doing it for years like we have, the good news is we don't necessarily take chances, but we've done so much that there's very little that we haven't seen, and so our brain has already gone through all of these scenarios, and you're pretty comfortable with everything. And if in an emergency situation, I don't have to worry about making sure I get my air out. I don't have to worry about how much air I have in my tank. I don't have to worry about my buoyancy because it's already there. I don't have to worry about my gear because I've dove with it so many times. I know it second nature without even looking at it. And so I can handle the situation. The problem you get is that the middle, which is the vast majority of divers who are comfortable enough. It's kind of like the kid that runs out in the street 10 times without getting hit by a car. And they go, oh, the first 10 times they do it, they're looking for cars because they know it's a dangerous situation. But there aren't any cars there. So they're like, oh, okay, I can just run out the street. After that, they start just running out in front of the street and they haven't been hit in the next 15 times because there weren't any cars there. But they haven't looked. And so they're training their mind to think, oh, okay, I don't have to look. I'll be fine. Same thing with divers. They get in that, instead of doing all the checks that you're supposed to do as a new diver, they start getting lazy on that kind of stuff. It hasn't bit them yet. And because it hasn't bit them, they end up continuing to do it, and it teaches their brain to say, oh, that's not really that important. You don't need to do that. You don't need to check your buddy's gear. It's not that big of a deal. You don't need to make sure that your air's turned on because you're probably always going to remember to turn your air on before you get on the back of the boat. You don't need to make sure your straps aren't about to break on your mask. All those little things that can go wrong, they don't check on it. It's not something that has happened that's wrong with them yet, even though it's things that can. Then that thing happens and they are totally unprepared. They're not like the guy that's got 1,000 dives that goes, oh, okay, I know how to handle this because I've done it. And they're not like the new diver who is already prepared for this because they're looking for it and ready. They're the person who is caught completely unawares because they got comfortable.
They were caught
doing the wrong
completely,
things.
what?
Completely unawares. Yes, that is a word.
Unawares?
Unawares.
I'm going with not a word. I'm going to leave that one in there and let you die on that hill.
Yeah. We're going to look that up. I would put about $7 down on that. Anyway, but that's you get my point. Is it?
Yeah, I love the kid in the street analogy. Right. I think that's great. I got another question. This one I've ran into, and I know you have ran into it. We've both been in a situation where we went diving with somebody. Maybe they were an acquaintance, or they're a good friend, but they're not like big divers, right? And you realize they've got some bad habits, or they say something that's really bad. Right. But you're having fun. You're friends with them. Or what happened, and how'd you navigate it?
It was a friend of mine. We were gearing up on the boat, and we were on a private boat, and could tell there was nervousness. All the things we talked about, the gear not being put together correctly, all that kind of stuff, kind of stumbling around the boat, could tell that he was not comfortable. I'm like, okay, well, let's see what happens. I don't want to take a chance that someone gets hurt, but at the same time, sometimes people just on a boat are nervous, and once they get in the water, they calm down.
Sure.
Right? So we get in the water, and I make sure, before he gets in the water, I said, make sure you got air in your BC. Oh, I want to go down quick. And I'm like, no, let's just make sure at the surface that, you're good to go. Gets in the water, starts panicking a little bit. He jumps in the water, doesn't hold his hand over his mask, even though I specifically said to. His mask comes off. Luckily, it was floating, and he had one of the mask straps on. Went over there and said, okay, let's get your mask on. Let's just relax for just a second. We'll get down in a second. Don't worry. It wasn't a ripping current. We'll get down there. Just relax. If we have to, we can get back on the boat and do that. He's like, oh, I don't want to get back on the boat. That comment alone of how difficult it would be to get back on the boat and get back in made me go, okay, this is not good. I could see the panic in his eyes of, breathing hard and just not comfortable at all. And I went, I asked him, I said, you sure you want to do this stuff? Yeah, I'm fine. And then he goes to put his regulator in his mouth, and he tried to put it in, and it was flipped around the other direction. And so then instead of just flipping it around, he turns it the other way so that the hose is over the front of his mask, and he puts it in upside down, and then tries to breathe off of it. And I just went, okay, wait, we kind of got to relax for a second because this is not working. Obviously, there's, an issue here. And I said, why don't we let you go on the next dive, okay? This way you can get all your gear figured out, get everything done to kind of see what's going to happen. And maybe you can calm down a little bit up there. And
so you asked him to wait a dive.
I did. I asked him to wait a dive.
How did he react?
He was actually okay with it.
Okay.
I think he was like, yeah, maybe I'll do the next dive. I had a pretty good feeling that he wasn't going to try and get in again. And I was right. When I got back up after that dive, I said, I was like, hey, how you feeling? He's like, I feel like I have a cold and my ears aren't going to clear. And it does. And I don't know, maybe he did. I don't think he did, but it was a perfectly fine reason not to go diving.
We point to something other than
right. Exactly.
I'm nervous.
Right.
No one wants to feel
and
nervous.
Obviously nobody called him out. Nobody wanted to.
Right.
And I think it was a very good way for him to handle it too.
Well, and it got you out of a further awkward situation.
Yeah, because I would have said no. I mean, if he had said he wanted to get back in the water and there was no improvement in terms of him calming down and all that.
How do you remedy that? What leads people to that point, like really quick? I mean, obviously inexperience, but people get certified, but then they find themselves in those predicaments.
Right. The first thing is diving beyond your abilities. For instance, if the only thing you've ever done was diving off a commercial boat, there's a big difference between diving off a commercial boat and diving off a private boat. Number one, the way you get in the water. Yeah. Number two, the way you get out, but also how you put your gear on. On a commercial boat, there's a bench you usually sit on. You put your gear on, you stand up, they hold your tank as you walk to the back of the boat, and you step in, and everything is perfect, right? Even on a rough day, it's still relatively easy to get on that. When you're on a private dive boat, you are having to put your gear on in probably an imperfect situation. There's usually no bench. There may be, maybe a small bench or something, but it's not designed for that.
Do you have a process for subtly vetting dive buddies before? Because you have your own boat that you dive off of pretty regularly. You're an instructor and blah, blah, blah. No one cares. Do you have a vetting process for figuring out if you're going to be babysitting or not, if you kind of wanted to invite them? Like, I know there's some dives where you've got the extra time and you're not doing anything, you're not lobstering or whatever, and so you've got the time to maybe get them a little brushed up. Yeah. You don't want to reteach a class or anything, but what strategy do you use before this ever happens?
Actually, you make a good point. It's the different kind of dives. If I'm out there to go do some hardcore diving, go, 100 plus feet, go get some lobsters, or I'm going to be real careful about who I bring on the boat.
How are you careful though?
Okay.
Like, oh yeah, hey, you maybe got this one friend. Yeah, I'm so-and-so wants to go to, or he's standing right there. And
I have had that situation before where I've been talking about it with someone and said, hey, yeah, we should go do this. And it goes, hey, I want to go do that too. And I'm like, do you know what we're talking about? Like 130-foot dive, with a ripping current and everything. And like, oh yeah, I'd like to do that. And I start talking to him like, well, what have you done? And usually the way I'll do it is I'll say, look, it's a difficult dive. It's one that's going to take we need some topside help and all that. Would you mind for this first time coming and being topside and learning kind of what we're doing on a dive like this? What can happen is the next time, you can hop in the water with us. It sees if the person is like, hey, yeah, I'm willing to learn and I'm willing to do that. And if they're not willing to do that, then you definitely don't want them underwater with you anyways. And if they are willing to do that, then that's kind of a good litmus test of, oh, okay, yeah, I'll go do that. See how quick they go down. You're looking for the sausages when they come back up. You're paying attention to the current. You're paying attention to the time, because you really do want someone topside helping out on a dive like that. But you don't want just one person on the top. You want at least another person, especially on a dive like that. If they're willing to understand that they don't know everything, that's the kind of mental attitude you want of someone who's going to be diving with you. Not the person who's like, yeah, I'm good with anything, whatever, I'll figure it out when I get down there, because that's how people die.
You're saying don't bring someone that's arrogant
Right. I mean, a good.
How are you ever going to get invited to anything?
Well, I'm the one that does the inviting. That's how.
Oh, okay. All right. The big chief. All right. Closing question here.
Sure.
Dive buddies.
Yeah.
Do we really need them? Should this be a hard role? Go.
That's a good question. It depends on the situation. You are always going to be safer with a dive buddy who has an equal experience to you and or not equal experience, but is a sufficient diver on their own. Self-sufficient. I don't necessarily believe that you are safer in a situation where the person is not self-sufficient, because if something happens to you, that doesn't help you at all having someone like that. So it really depends on the diver. If you can find someone with decent enough experience to be self-sufficient, then a dive buddy is always a good idea. If you cannot find that, then no, I would not say a dive buddy is always a good idea. There are situations.
So should you just not do the dive though and wait till you can find a good dive buddy? So you got yourself into a corner there.
Probably not. You probably shouldn't dive on your own.
If you ever get a lawyer cornered in his own words, this is what it looks like. This is what it sounds like right here.
I'm trying not to be hypocritical is what I'm saying. I'm trying to be safe but not hypocritical. If you are going to do diving by yourself, number one, you need an independent air source. Number two, you dang well better have good topside support so that everybody knows where you are, and if there's a problem, they can find you. And number three, you better be so good at what you're doing, you don't have to think about anything else. Like, the only thing you would have to think about in an emergency situation is getting yourself out of it. You don't have to think about how much air you have in your tank. You don't have to think about how to work your gear. You don't have to think about how to do anything else. The only thing you would have to worry about is how to get yourself out of that situation. In those kinds of situations, yes, I think you if you don't have 1,000 dives under your belt, then I wouldn't think about it. Maybe after 1,000 dives, you can start approaching that. But
do you think that if you're doing that, maybe you've already missed something? Because if you're going somewhere to where, yes, you meet all those requirements to dive, solo, and there are solo certifications out there. Exactly. Let's say you meet all that, you've got 1,000 dives all over the place, and you are fully competent. Why couldn't you, if you've been diving that much, you haven't made one friend?
I knew you were going with this.
It's a real question, but if I get the chance to also throw a roast in there, I can't leave that out on the table.
No. I mean, I think that the answer is, if you're a diver who wants to go diving all the time, it's hard to get people to go with you.
That are self-sufficient.
Correct. It's hard to find that sometimes because it's an investment.
I've found so many people struggle with finding buddies, or they can't find a dive to go on. And I've seen two ways to fix that. One, the easiest thing to do to find a dive buddy, besides go to your dive shops, get on dives, is go on Facebook pages, even if you're not into Facebook. Right now in 2022, Facebook pages reign supreme as far as meetup groups. You can see who they are. It's a relatively, public forum. I always tell a lot of people, if there's a particular dive in your area maybe you'd like to do, look up that, and then there's usually a meetup group based on that dive versus just looking for a random meetup group. Right. Or look for your town or city. So if you can find the page, even if you're not into Facebook, you can just make a little account or whatever. There are other ways, but that seems to be the easiest. There is probably a group around you wherever, even in the Midwest. There are lakes, there are silos, you'd be surprised. There's a group out there that would probably love to have you. Secondly, I've found that people romanticize, that are new divers. Okay, you're not always going to be able to get a beautiful trip to Tahiti. Right. All right. Go do the crappy little spring or lake dive if that's all you got, and that way you're at least get yourself up to a certain skill level to where you feel comfortable with your gear and your movements, your buoyancy, all that stuff. But I find people romanticize it a little too much. When are you guys doing a big trip it's going to be so much better when you do the big trip if you're comfortable, because maybe you were diving in the retention pond behind your house. Right. No, well, maybe not the retention pond.
Yeah, maybe not the retention pond.
Get a dive in, even if it's not beautiful.
Yep.
Find a group. The dive is out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the show. I just want to say I appreciate your efforts, but you don't have to send us a treasure chest full of gold, unless you actually have one. But you can always drop a 5-star review, or even go to sweetwaterscuba.com to support our channel with a small contribution, or become a member, which gains access to all the interviews uncensored and everything in one hub, and especially my personal online courses where I share all my experience and knowledge with you, so you can take what I've learned and run with it. Plus, we send our members custom art postcards that actually show up to your physical mailbox every month. Any and all forms of support are appreciated, and at the end of the day, I'm just glad you're here. Hope to see you underwater soon.